So what I want to talk about this morning is the possibility that healing is freedom, or healing as freedom. And I want to suggest something that may be a little bit surprising, and that is that maybe healing isn't the goal of this journey. Maybe freedom, incremental increases in freedom is the goal. A mentor of mine once said that he doesn't use, he's a psychotherapist, and he doesn't use the metaphor of healing anymore, because he says these experiences of early mistreatment are catastrophic and you don't actually get over them, but that doesn't mean that you can't increase a life of freedom. And so I'm going to talk about that, because we can't really erase betrayal or neglect or become people for whom the past never happened. But we can be freer and freer. And so if you think about this, freedom is refusing to let the worst thing that ever happened to us determine our entire future. That's how I'm defining it. And so what I want to do is I want to use a biblical metaphor, a biblical story, to kind of frame this. And before I do that, I want to be really clear. The story of the Exodus is first and foremost the sacred story of the Jewish people. It's a story of oppression, actual oppression, liberation, and covenant. And it's provided a language of hope and liberation for peoples who are enduring actual political and social oppression. So I don't want to reduce that historical, political, or sacred reality to psychology. But I think that these great sacred stories often work on multiple levels. They tell us something about history, yes. About God, yes. About communities, yes. And also about the inner life. So the Exodus is also an archetype. It describes something that many of us experience psychologically and spiritually. So it holds all of these levels: historical, political, spiritual, emotional, psychological, all these truths at the same time. So here's a story in a nutshell. The Hebrew people are enslaved, and they're enslaved for generations. And eventually slavery becomes normal. And this is like most experiences of early mistreatment. We don't know that we're living inside of Egypt, in other words, because we've never lived anywhere else. We assume that anxiety is normal, walking on eggshells is normal, never disappointing anyone is normal. And so we adapt, we survive, and eventually that survival becomes our identity, who we think we are. And you remember I call these core unconscious beliefs, like I don't belong, I don't matter, I'm not worthy, I'm not legitimate. If I disappoint people, I'll lose love. If I express myself, I'll be rejected. And these beliefs are invisible, and they're not true. But Egypt then becomes a place where we actually live but don't know it. The only life that we can imagine, in other words. And this is the way empire works in every historical period. Eventually, empire installs itself inside of the people it controls. And even after the chains disappear, a voice remains. It's like an inner Pharaoh. It says, you'll never change. Stay small. Don't risk. Keep everyone happy. Don't upset anyone. Who do you think you are? And so the outer oppression becomes inner government, if you like. Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, called this governmentality. And so Pharaoh becomes the mythic embodiment of our core unconscious beliefs of our cubs. The internal authority that insists that the past must remain in power. And you remember we talked last week about the brain as predictive. It doesn't just perceive reality out there objectively the way things are, it predicts it. It asks itself, what happened before in the past? What kept us safe? What kind of world should I be prepared to live in? And then it uses that past to anticipate and sometimes, yes, recreate the future. In other words, our cubs become predictions. And there's a lot of brain science right now that talks about the default mode network. And this is a little nut of neurons that is clustered, and it keeps our brain's potential within that cluster when there's so much more potential. But it's the past. This is the mode that we default to. It says, I'm this kind of person. I can't do this. This will always happen. People won't accept the real me. And it's not that the nervous system is trying to make us miserable. It's trying to make tomorrow look like yesterday, because yesterday, however familiar it might be, is what we know. There's a certainty. So the point is that Pharaoh doesn't have to put us in chains anymore. Just convince us that we're still slaves. So let's look at a character within the story, Moses. Fascinating man, because he's afraid. He gets called to confront the Pharaoh, and he complains that he can't speak well. He argues with God. He's not qualified. He tries to persuade God to send somebody else for this mission. And, sound familiar? So leadership doesn't begin after the fear is gone. It begins in the presence of fear. And I would say that you could use Moses as a metaphor for the heart self, the original self, the part of us that, existed before survival kicked in. It's not the polished self or the fearless self, the perfectly healed self. It's just that part of us that knows this isn't who you were created to be. And just like Moses hears the cries of the enslaved people, our heart self hears the cries of the parts of us that have been silenced, frightened, forced to perform. And notice that something within us begins to say, there's a protest that forms. We say, this can't continue. Had enough. Had enough. And God doesn't say to Moses, first, get yourself together, become confident. First, just get rid of your fear. Heal all your wounds, and then you'll be ready. God in the story just says, go. So freedom begins with taking action, with movement. So he takes leadership because something deeper than fear has called him forward. I'm calling that heart self. So this is my point here. The first act of freedom is the protest from within. It's saying, I've had enough. Let my people go. Let this be over. I've suffered enough. And it's a necessary condition of freedom. There has to be a refusal. Before the Red Sea or the Reed Sea can part, somebody has to confront this inner authority, so-called inner authority of the survival self. And every recovery from kind of an ancient mistreatment contains a moment like this when we finally say, that's enough. I won't let shame govern me anymore. I won't let fear raise my children. I won't let people-pleasing run my relationships. And I'm not going to abandon myself in order to stay connected to anybody. And this is kind of an inner leadership. It's just the heart saying, I refuse to allow Pharaoh to remain the unquestioned ruler of my inner world, of my life. And let my people go becomes an inner declaration. Let my voice go free, right? Let my desire be free. Let my anger be free. Let my creativity be free. Let my capacity to say yes and say no be free. Let me be free. And then we have these actual experiences of these tastes of freedom that are real. It's like the Red Sea parts, and it's like, oh my God, this is what it's like. There's a future, there's a promised land. Yes, a boundary is finally set. We speak our truth. A relationship is left where we're not being treated well. There's a spiritual experience that opens us up. So it's interesting that although the Hebrews leave Egypt in a single night, notice what happens. I mean, what happens? Yes, the chains come off. The Red Sea parts. These moments are actual. But that doesn't necessarily become sort of a permanent foundation. It takes 40 years in the story to deliver Egypt, to deliver Israel from Egypt, right? And it's the paradox of what is called healing, I guess. You can have these big experiences, but the transformation is often gradual, because the identity formed under slavery, under the old cubs, takes the time it takes to come off. And we've talked about how that can happen, and the mentorships that I run, et cetera, have practices to sort of continue to loosen those chains. Because the healing doesn't just happen in Egypt, right? And it just doesn't happen overnight. There's this wilderness time, 40 years, a long time. And they complain in the wilderness. They're afraid. They lose trust. They idealize the past. They say, at least we were eating when we were slaves. What's this, though? They can't bear the uncertainty of freedom. We knew who we were there. We knew our place. And that happens to us all the time. Think about it. We set a boundary with somebody, and then we apologize for having a need. We speak honestly, we speak our truth, and then we spend 3 days and most nights just wondering if we said it right, if it did, should I have said that? Was that stupid? We decide to live our own life, and then we feel guilty when we disappoint people. We're in the wilderness. Egypt was oppressive for sure, but it was predictable. And the predictive brain wants us to return to what it already knows. This is part of the addiction to the past. When that happens, it doesn't mean that the breakthrough was false, and we shouldn't beat up on ourselves. We should just mindfully realize what's happening, set it in context, and then find some tenderness towards ourselves. We're in the wilderness. We're in the wilderness. And we're having mini experiences or incremental degrees of increases in freedom. And what I'm suggesting here is that is one of the best definitions of healing that I can think of. And there's this wonderful story of the promised land. And I love the story, and I historically affirm the right of Jewish people to have their own land. And extended into a metaphor, it's like we can imagine the promised land as a place where we live in freedom, and we live in actual safety, we find community, we have the life we want, we live, we take risks, we're bold, we we uh, we can imagine and realize our preferred future. So this is a story of healing as freedom. And it's important to realize that even the promised land isn't obviously perfection. It's not a life that has no grief, it has no fear, no uncertainty. And it's not a place where the past never happened, obviously. But you could think about it as a place of authorship, of self-authorship. It's when we claim our right not to be ruled by the past, not to be ruled by any Pharaoh. So healing then is not being untouched by the past, right? It's just no longer being governed by it. And there's these little increases in freedom. And maybe the important questions are like being able to name, am I more free this year than last year? We can ask ourselves, like, where is Pharaoh still speaking in your life? Is there a particular sentence that your inner Pharaoh repeats most often to keep us enslaved? How would you put this one? What's the most familiar captivity that you're tempted to mistake for safety? And where is your own Moses quietly asking you to take leadership in your life? And right now, if you had to say, let my people go, the equivalent of that, enough, where would you be directing that? And maybe most importantly, it's like, which direction are you walking? Are you going back towards Egypt or toward the life that's waiting for you? Okay, let's open it up now. Questions, comments, I'd love to hear from you.